for the past
is the main one.
Well, one of the very reasons that I am actually here talking about movies and have done so for the past 50 years is because of James Bond.
Oh, I'd like to
He
know
was
more
a
about
great
that.
inspiration when I was a kid, yeah.
Well, Dr. Patrick Greene is on the phone now from the museum where a great display of James Bond memorabilia. It's designing 007, 50 years of Bond style, Jim.
Absolutely wonderful, long overdue, and I hope it's a great success.
Patrick, good evening.
Good evening. It's great to be on your show.
Please tell us some of the highlights there at the museum.
Well, I'm sure it is going to be a great show and a great success because I think in a day or two we'll be approaching our first 10,000 visitors through, and it only opened just over a week ago, so it's definitely going to be a success. And the reason for that is I think everybody has a relationship with James Bond.
Well, of course, James Bond has been an important part of our culture for so many decades now, for 5 decades, as you well know.
I do.
And he's one of those characters now that you are almost born with his psychology in your blood. You almost sort of, from an early age, know who he is. And the previous generation to me was people like Charlie Chaplin and John Wayne. Now it's James Bond, it's everywhere. But I don't think they would have guessed that it would have ever reached this pinnacle, this extraordinary pinnacle. And by the way, I think he's going to be around for a long, long time to come, and I think there'll be a lot more exhibitions to come as well.
I'm sure you're right. And it was kicked off in such a brilliant way with Dr. No, and I think that was in 1962. And as I've admitted in the lead up to this exhibition, I actually skipped school in order to see it. So I lived in Devon at the time. I was at school in Totnes, and there was a sort of conference of 16, 17-year-old school boys and girls in Torquay, and I was there for it. And I and 5 friends said, "Do you know, I don't think this is very exciting. Dr. No might be better." And so we walked along the cliff path, down into Torquay, into the cinema, and there was Dr. No. And of course, that was the first point for many, many people in seeing James Bond.
Dr. No was Dr. No from Rush for Love were more the feeling grounds for Bond. They were the first 2 films for him to find his feet, to which direction he was going in. When it actually exploded and became a total global phenomenon was Goldfinger in December of 1964.
Yep.
That was the very first time in the history of cinema when all logic was thrown completely out of the window when they said, let's just have some fun and let's aim it at the adults. But the kids grabbed hold of it as well. Of course, who ever heard of a car with machine guns and, of course, bulletproof shield and squirting oil and doing all sorts of things like that? It was an adult fantasy thing. The novels are quite different to the films, but what they've both got, they've got this wonderful marriage. They're so different to each other, but yet they can't live without each other. And Fleming's creation is just quite extraordinary.
And there's another creative genius involved as well, and that was Ken Adams, the set designer.
Oh, yeah.
I think he's the only set designer who's been knighted for his craft, but his designs were phenomenal. And throughout the exhibition at Melbourne Museum, we've got lots and lots of those designs, so you can actually see how, Goldfinger's lair and so on came off the page, really, came off the sketch, and into 3 dimensions, and into a very convincing, but as you say, fantastical 3 dimensions in the film.
Well, of course, his design... Oh, sorry, Philip.
No, I was going to ask you to walk us through the exhibition, if you will, Patrick, and tell us some of the highlights of it.
Right, okay. Well, one of the highlights is the very first thing you see, and that is the car. The Aston Martin.
From Skyfall.
Well, from Skyfall, of course, brought back for Skyfall, and which, one of the saddest moments in a Bond film that I've experienced was seeing it destroyed.
Yeah.
Yeah, I nearly cried when that happened on the screen. I thought, what are they doing? Because that was the Aston Martin that he presumably used in Goldfinger.
Well, you can dab your eyes again, because also in the film we have a wonderful 3rd scale model that was used in the film, and a third-scale model of it in its destroyed form. So the real car survives, and it was brought to Melbourne for the exhibition. And I tell you, it's a car that was beautiful when it was made, and it's as beautiful today. So, and then you go into the gold room, and there's poor Shirley Eaton covered in gold paint on a bed, which you remember from the film Chic Spires because of the gold paint. And there's all sorts of things there. There's Q's lab and all sorts of things which have been used in the films all the way up to the present day. Because, as you just said, the gadgets are very important in the films. And then you go through to the casino scene. And one of the things, a lot of people say, this is a great film for the lads. It's also, women enjoy the film, the exhibition just as much. There's fantastic costume in it, jewellery, all sorts of things. Then there are foreign parts, because, again, one of the attractions of James Bond is the settings for the stories, go to every continent and to the most beautiful and wonderful places. And then up into space, of course, and so on and so forth. So it finishes with the villains, and James Bond wouldn't be complete without a lot of very, very interesting villains, including Jaws, you remember, with those amazing teeth.
Yep.
And yes, the teeth are in the exhibition.
Of course,
that's marvellous.
The most extraordinary thing about 007 is it cannot be attributed to one thing. It's totally impossible. Originally, the only one thing you can attribute it to, of course, is the novels by Ian Fleming.
Yeah.
But when the films came along, and I hope you agree with me on this, Doctor, it's an amalgamation of time. Right at the appropriate time, a group of people came together. We had Harry Saltzman and Albert Broccoli, who were poles apart from each other in everything they believed in.
Yeah.
But Harry Saltzman owned the rights to the books. Cubby Broccoli wanted the rights to the books, but yet he could get the funding to make the movies, and Harry Saltzman couldn't.
Interesting.
That's one aspect.
Yeah.
The second aspect, Columbia Pictures said no to the Bond series, which was Cubby Broccoli's home. United Artists wouldn't let them out the door until they had a deal. That was number two. Number three, you had to have the right director. He was the man that fashioned Bond on the screen, and his name is Terence Young.
That's right.
Then you had to have the set designer, Ken Adam, because they did not have a big budget, so it was his lavish, shadowy sets that made them look big and lavish. Then, of course, you had the marriage of the editor, Peter Hunt, who knew for some time, Peter Hunt, who gave this new style of action editing and jump cut editing to the series. But one of the two of the other most important factors were Monty Norman and John Barry, who came in with this extraordinary scores. Now, any one of those would not have made Bond what it is today, but they all came in 1962, and they all locked in together. They locked horns together.
Well, I can add
the rest is history.
And I can add two to your list.
Mm-hmm.
Sean Connery.
Well, Sean Connery, as you're probably well aware, Sean Connery was the fourth person to play James Bond, not the first.
That's right.
Yes.
So tell us why, Jim.
He was the fourth. Barry Nelson first played him in Casino Royale in 1954.
Yeah.
Bob Holness played him in 1956.
And then David Niven?
No, it was Bob Simmons was Sean Connery's stand-in and stuntman. Played him a third time, because the very first image that you get on the Bond screen is the gun barrel sequence with James Bond walking across the screen. Well, Sean Connery was unavailable to film that, so Bob Simmons stood in for Sean Connery, and in effect he became the third person to portray James Bond, or the first person person on the big screen to portray James Bond, and Sean Connery was the next.
Why didn't the others take off? What was the stumbling block?
It was just this magic element of all these people that they brought their magic together that locked everything in that did it. And of course, at the same time, it was so heavily protected and copyrighted, you couldn't emulate it. For argument's sake, Never Say Never Again, which is one of the major Bond breakaway films, you couldn't have the Bond theme, you couldn't have the gun barrel sequence. It was all owned by Eon Productions, and all those elements.
Dr. Patrick...
And Eon Productions, of course, is the company that has kept wonderful things from every film that they have made, and that's why we have the exhibition that we've got.
Well, there we are.
The Bond style. Because if they hadn't been conscious of doing this and doing it very professionally, well, forget the exhibition.
It's on at the Melbourne Museum, Dr. Patrick Greene, isn't it, at
it's
the moment?
It's Melbourne Museum. It's, as I say, it's just been open for just over a week. It's open every day from 10 till 5. We've created a Bond bar to go with it for refreshments. It's a fantastic experience.
And it's on until February of next year.
It is indeed, that's right.
All right. Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Patrick Greene. I like my drink shaken, not stirred. Thanks.
My pleasure.
Good on you. That's at the museum. Worth going along and having a look at that.
I'm looking forward to it very, very much.
Now, here's the big